Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Textile Talk. My name is Lucy Shaken. I'm SACWA's Communications Coordinator and your Textile Talks organizer. I'm Zooming to you from Philadelphia in the United States. I've already seen some people in the chat saying where they're tuning in from. I saw the UK, Canada, New Zealand, and across the US. So we would love to know where you are tuning in from. Please feel free to say hi in the chat. And I'm going to do a quick introduction before we get started with today's program. Textile Talks are presented by the International Quilt Museum, Quilt Alliance, Studio Art Quilt Associates, or SACWA, and Surface Design Association. We love bringing you these free programs every week thanks to the support of our sponsors and contributions from viewers like you. If you enjoy Textile Talks, please tell a friend about us, post about us on social media, and consider supporting our work financially with a donation at sacwa.com/ttsupport. Some super quick Zoom notes. This is a webinar, so that means we can't see or hear you, but we can read your comments in the chat. We have live captions provided by the National Captioning Institute. You can turn these on or off by finding the CC or Live Captions button, which should be at the bottom of your screen if you're on a computer, or if you're on a mobile device, it will be in your settings. And if you're like me and you just updated your Zoom to the most recent version today, your captions might look a little different. So if it looks different from how you're used to and you don't like it, go ahead and play around with those settings. You can do some stuff to change how it looks. Please use the chat as you already are for commentary and greetings. We will have time for Q&A at the end of today's program, so please put your questions in that Q&A box. And if you have suggestions for ways we can improve or for topics you'd like to see in future textile talks, please let us know in the post-event survey. Today's program is Muscogee Journey, an exploration of identity, belonging, home, and heritage with Melinda Schwakhofer. Melinda is an American artist and citizen of the Muscogee Nation. She now lives and works on Dartmoor in the UK. Throughout her personal artistic journey and training as a counseling psychologist, Melinda believes that deep healing can be achieved through art making. Melinda is an internationally exhibited, award-winning artist. Her work has been acquired by the British Museum, the New York Public Library, the Royal Albert Memorial Museum in Exeter, UK, and private collectors in America and Europe. Melinda, thank you so much for being here today. Let's go ahead and get started.
Okay. So thank you to Studio Art Quilt Associates and Lucy for that wonderful introduction, for hosting this event, and to all of you for coming to share my Muscogee journey. Let me begin by introducing myself in my native language. Hesje, Melinda Schwakhofer Jehujefkados, Este Muscogee Oas. This means hello, my name is Melinda Schwakhofer. I am Muscogee in the Muscogee language. I'm an American textile artist, an enrolled member of the Muscogee Creek Nation, and I have Austrian American ancestry. I live in Devon, England, and I'm coming to you live from my studio. For nearly 20 years, I've used textile art to map my reconnection to my Native American roots. Today, I'll cover my family story, introduce you to Muscogee history and culture, and touch on some wider themes that are common to all people: identity, belonging, home, and heritage. These themes all appear in my art. Now I'm going to begin sharing slides to illustrate my talk, and it is pollen time in the UK, so if I need to stop and clear my throat, I'll mute my mic so we don't all have to listen to that. So I'm going to start sharing. Okay, so is that all good?
That looks great, thanks.
Perfect. So my Muscogee journey is a body of work that has helped me to reconnect with my Native American nation, its culture, its people, and my family. The work documents my own personal journey, but before we dive into it, I'd like to set some context. First of all, who are the Muscogee? I'll begin with some terminology. Our name for ourselves is Muscogee. When the first British settlers encountered us in the 1720s, they called us Creek because we lived along waterways. Not very imaginative, I know. Our nation is called the Muscogee Nation. Our nation is called the Muscogee Nation. These days we go by Muscogee Creek, or Muscogee Creek. Today, the Muscogee Nation is based in Okmulgee, Oklahoma. We are the fourth largest tribe in the United States with over 100,000 enrolled Muscogee citizens. Nearly 60,000 of us live beyond the reservation. So where did the Muscogee come from and how did they end up in Oklahoma? Aspects of this history are illustrated in some of the details in my art quilt, The Road to Oklahoma. This short clip from my film Road to Oklahoma tells the story. These are our original homelands, the rivers, valleys, and forests that straddle the borders of present-day Georgia and Alabama, shown in a government map of the Indian nations in the Southern Department in 1766. Indian Territory. I'm sorry. These are our original homelands, the rivers, valleys, and forests that straddle the borders of present-day Georgia and Alabama, shown in a government map of the Indian nations in the Southern Department in 1766. Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma, is a long way from these lands. This journey was to become known as the Trail of Tears for very good reason. About 1 in 4 of the Muscogee people who were forced to walk the 1,500-mile journey died along the way, or shortly after arriving in Indian Territory. The plans to remove Native Americans to Indian Territory was resisted. Native Americans appealed directly to President Andrew Jackson to intervene. But Jackson cited the 10th Amendment and refused to stop the states from violating federal treaties. In his response to the Native Americans, who claimed injustice, backed white settler states, but also promised that in Indian Territory they would be beyond the limits of any state, in possession of land of their own, which they shall possess as long as grass grows or water runs. I am and will protect them and be their friend and father. Other maps included in the quilt show how the lands on which we lived continued to be systematically changed, carved out, carved up, and regimented to make it easier to subvert and steal their ownership. After the forced removal of the Muscogee in 1832, this map showed all the land in Indian Territory, the place that would later become Oklahoma, showing those territories that were set aside for the Creek. All of this territory was, traditionally, held in common by the tribe. Common ownership, however, was a concept that the U.S. government could not stomach. In the Dawes Act of 1887, the land was broken up into allotments that were assigned to individual members of the tribe. This image shows the allotments of my grandmother, Mattie Davis, and Uncle Sam Davis. In this way, millions of acres of land were taken out of native hands and made available to white settlers in what was known as the land rush. This poster advertises railroad travel for immigrants to Indian Territory. The advertisement includes a map of Indian Territory and the lands that would be open to homesteading. It presumes that land in current-day Oklahoma would soon be open to settlement, and with good reason. In a message to Congress in 1888, President Grover Cleveland had strongly recommended that Indian Territory be open for settlement, and there was no doubt but that Congress will pass the necessary act declaring the unoccupied lands in Indian Territory open for homestead and preemption. The Indian Appropriations Act of 1889 officially opened unassigned lands in Oklahoma Territory to white settlers under the guidelines of the Homestead Act. These unassigned lands were the same lands that had been removed from Native American control under the Dawes Act 2 years previously. That land amounted to over 10 million acres and attracted settlers from far and wide, including a family of Austrian Americans called Schwakhofer. This might sound like dry history from a long time ago, but the ripples and repercussions still flow today. And the actions of those long ago times were not one-offs. They were part of a decades-long strategy to undermine and erase all Native American cultures. As recently as the 1950s, for instance, the Indian Relocation Act of 1956 was purposely designed to incentivize Native Americans to leave Indian reservations for urban areas, acquire vocational skills, and assimilate into the general population, leaving their own cultures behind, uprooting centuries of tradition. This also features in my quilt. As Long as Grass Grows is a multi-layered piece that shows the complexity of stolen land and broken promises. The base of the architectural tracing paper has a statement by President James Monroe promising freedom and protection in the West. As with the promises of most presidents, Monroe's words would later prove to be false. Next is a map of Indian Territory printed on Lakota paper. An Indian land for sale poster is printed onto organza and machine stitched over with a grid of red. The stitches represent how our commonly held land was divided up into individual allotments. My Austrian American ancestors moved to Oklahoma from New York at some time during the 1880s. Could they have been drawn by the promise of free Indian land as so many others were? Very probably. Whatever the reason they came, it set the stage for the meeting of two 16-year-olds, my grandparents, one a Muscogee girl called Mattie Davis, and the other a white boy called Ted Schwakhofer, to meet and produce my dad, Frank. Now let's meet Frank. My native heritage comes through my father. He was born in 1920 to a Muscogee mother and an Austrian American father. He grew up in a place and time where he was made to feel ashamed about being part Indian, as it was called in those days. The Muscogee kids didn't like him because he was half white, and he was called a half-breed by the white kids. In school, his teachers taught him that Indians are savages. After his mother's early death, he was raised by his grandmother and my namesake, Melinda Davis. A full-blood Muscogee woman, she was born in Indian Territory in 1876. She never learned to speak much English. My dad's main language was English. He could understand Muscogee but never learned to speak it, a result without any doubt of an educational policy and a society that aimed to eradicate Native American culture. Due to the racism he encountered and poor opportunities available, he left Oklahoma as soon as he could. He got out in 1936 by hopping freight trains and riding the rails around the country. He was 16 years old. Later in life, he always had a car and would often go back to Oklahoma to see his grandmother, Melinda, whom he loved, but he eventually left for good. Indian with a Car has a photo of my dad printed onto fabric with a gold star from Muscogee, the city of his birth, and all of the roads leaving Muscogee stitched in red. Frank met and married my mother, Nell, an Anglo-American woman, and I was born and raised in Los Angeles along with my siblings. My birth certificate shows race of father as white. In previous generations, people with Native heritage often tried to hide or erase their indigeneity to protect themselves and their children. When my dad passed in 2002, I came across his birth certificate, which listed him as white Indian. For the base of my textile piece, White Indian, I made a digital collage combining his birth certificate with another document called a birth affidavit, where my great-grandmother, Melinda Davis, had her daughter, my dad's mother, Mattie Davis, registered as a Creek citizen. I divided it up into black and white. I machine embroidered a portrait of my dad over it and hand-stitched X's, Melinda's mark, around him. In the top, I used red, white, and blue variegated thread to show how the US government had put us into boxes. I can understand how my dad felt boxed in and torn in two. So I grew up disconnected from the Muscogee Nation, Muscogee community and culture, and my Muscogee extended family. Even though we lived so far away from the Muscogee Nation, my dad had the Muscogee Nation news delivered to our house in Southern California. Some of my first memories and how I learned that we're Native American are of my dad sitting at the kitchen table and reading the Muscogee Nation news. In Portrait of My Dad, I machine embroidered my dad onto a digital composition printed onto paper and surrounded by hand stitching. He'd say, "We're part Indian, we're Creek, we're one of the 5 civilized tribes." The term 5 civilized tribes was applied by the US government in the early federal period of the US to the 5 Native American nations in the Southeast. White Americans classified them as civilized because they had adopted attributes of the Anglo-American culture, for example, written language, agriculture, and government structures. The term is seldom used nowadays because of the derogatory implication that other Native tribes were uncivilized. These nations are now referred to as the 5 tribes. Back to Frank. I had a pretty difficult relationship with my father. He was addicted to gambling and alcohol and had a very violent temper. I grew up being afraid of him and spent much of my adult life estranged from him. I never understood why he was like this until later in my journey. I'll come to that in a moment. Although I inherited my dad's shame about being part Indian, as it was referred to in my childhood, I also had a little bit of pride that there was something different about me. Now I'll move on to my journey of exploration and reconnection. It took me until my late 20s to begin to learn about the culture that made me, but that Frank had hidden from me. I began to research and learn about Muscogee culture and history. At university, I studied psychology as an undergraduate, then counseling psychology as a graduate. I knew that my family was somewhat dysfunctional, and I learned about family dynamics and family systems. During my studies, I also learned about the intergenerational psychological effects of inherited trauma on children of European Holocaust survivors. But it wasn't until I came across the work of Dr. Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart about a decade later that everything began to make sense from the perspective of my own family experience. Braveheart is a prominent Lakota scholar and advocate known for her work on historical trauma and its effects on Native American communities. She has developed the concept of historical trauma, which refers to the cumulative emotional and psychological wounding over the lifespan and across generations, emanating from massive group trauma experience. Historical trauma is suffered by Indigenous peoples due to colonization, forced assimilation, and systemic oppression. These traumas are passed down through the generations, affecting the health and well-being of Native American individuals and communities today. Historical unresolved grief accompanies this trauma. Learning about all this finally helped me to understand my dad and that his alcoholism, gambling, and violence was a reaction to this inherited trauma. This understanding also allowed me to address and begin to heal the trauma that was handed to me through my father. In doing so, I have discovered my resilience and am reconnecting with my Native heritage. Art making has given me the place to do this work. In the early 2000s, a distant relative sent me documents and information, which enabled me to trace my Muscogee family back several generations. Dawes cards list individuals who were accepted as eligible for tribal membership. This is how I discovered my great-great-great-grandparents who were born in our homelands, Pahos Harjo and Eliza Phillips. Today, the 5 tribes determine tribal membership by requiring applicants to provide proof of descent from a person who is listed on the Dawes rolls. I followed this paper trail to discover my own Muscogee ancestry, and I have recently reconnected to Muscogee relatives living in Oklahoma. In 2006, I did an Art and Mental Health Foundation course, which solidified the power of art making as a healing force. Art making has given me a way to process and speak about emotions and events, both personal and historic, for which it may sometimes be difficult to find the right words. In 2008, I was ready to begin my Muscogee journey. Winter Trees Wept is the first major piece that I made on my Muscogee journey. It took me 2 years to complete. I understood the pain that my ancestors and all of the people indigenous to the Southeast felt upon being removed from our homelands. In this work, I thought about the land itself, the rivers and forests that it sheltered and supported and had been in turn cared for by the Muscogee. I wondered if the land felt the loss of a people who had spoken the language of the forest and lived in harmony with the earth. I wrote a haiku. The winter trees wept, a river of blood, when we were torn from the land. I chose a newsprint font to give the words a journalistic reportage feeling. The 3 large squares on the front of the quilt are monoprinted with black ink and foliage. The quilt is double-sided. The text on the left-hand side is from And Still the Waters Run by Angie Debo and gives a factual textbook account of the Muscogee removals. It is typed onto rice paper using a vintage typewriter. Personal stories of the removals were whispered down through the generations. I chose a handwritten schoolroom font for the words of one man's memories and the stories his grandfather told him. The font also harkens back to the boarding school system of repression. I wanted it to look like it was written by a school child. And the quilting was all done by hand. As I stitched the fabric on a cold, sleety day in Devon, I could feel the deep pain and grief of our exile from our ancestral homelands. I paused and sobbed for several minutes, feeling and finally releasing the pain that had been carried and passed down through so many generations. I truly feel that we carry inherited trauma as well as deep wisdom from our ancestors. I also believe that when we are able to heal intergenerational wounds, It not only keeps them from being transferred to future generations, but that the previous generations are healed. My early Muscogee Journey work was often very difficult to make. The works themselves and the act of making them carried me through some very difficult emotions, hard discoveries, and dark places. I'm so grateful that I had my art making and creativity to carry me through. Before I move on to some other pieces I want to show you, let me take a moment and talk about some of the iconography you'll see in my artwork. Using motifs from historic and current Muscogee culture connects me to my heritage. Mississippian refers to a civilization that flourished in what are now the Midwestern, Eastern, and Southern states of the US. It was a complex and culturally rich network of peoples that existed from around the year 800 to 1600 AD. In fact, at a time when London was little more than a village, the Mississippian city of Cahokia, near present-day St. Louis, had a population of up to 20,000 people. Mississippian culture and iconography is a precursor of Muskogee culture, cosmology, and worldview. In this worldview, for example, the universe and world is divided into three separate realms with an upper, middle, and lower world. The upper world is often associated with the sun, sky, and spiritual beings, while the lower world may be linked to the underworld, spirits, and the unseen. The middle world is where humans live and interact with both the upper and lower realms. The axis mundi, or world axis, is depicted as a tree or post connecting the three worlds. The beings of the upper and lower realms are in constant opposition to each other. It is thought that humans who reside in the middle world can resolve the conflict by creating balance and order from chaos. We do this through our ceremonies and living in a good way. In the cross and circle motif, the cross symbolizes the cardinal directions and the sacred fire, and the circle symbolizes the sun. These are details from my art quilt, Edge Dancer. The circle also symbolizes wholeness. The cross and circle places us in the center of the four directions. Harmony is a needle-felted cross and circle design with four squares in the center, signifying balance. The mica hand is an exquisite carving made by people of the Hopewell culture. As an artist, the hand symbolizes my ability to manifest my creations and the many strands and facets that I bring together in my artwork. In Southeastern cosmology, the Great Hand constellation, facing downward in the night sky, is where our ancestors dwell. You might recognize this constellation under another name, Orion. Its Muskogee name is Enkathako. Even though I am so far away from my nation in Oklahoma, when I look up at the sky on a winter's night and see the Path of Souls, also known as the Milky Way, and Enkathako, I feel connected to my ancestors and to the Muskogee people. In the Southeast, the production of gorgets as both decorative and practical items was commonplace. A gorget is meant to be worn around the neck. These were typically carved from marine shells. The iconography of this gorget is thought to be a cosmogram, that is, a two-dimensional geometric figure that represents the Mississippian cosmology, with depictions of the upper, middle, and lower worlds. The 6 dots represent the Pleiades constellation. I've hand-stitched it with hand-dyed silk thread onto silk noil fabric. Rattlesnake gorgets have associations with death and the lower world. I machine embroidered this gorget onto linen fabric, embellished it with beads, and frayed the edges. This serpent monster gorget is machine embroidered onto linen. In another use of Mississippian iconography, I recreated this carving of a fish with machine embroidery and machine applique onto bleached, hand-painted mulberry bark. My art quilt Palofa combines many of these elements. Palofa is a Muskogee word that means woods with a river running through them. It is inspired by my homelands in the Southeast. The axis mundi is a forked staff topped with a sun circle. Birds inhabit the upper world. The border quilting and applique hold Mississippian and Eastern woodland motifs and designs. The river is inspired by pottery, which was found along the banks of the Tallapoosa River where my Muskogee ancestors lived. The water serpents in the river are from a Mississippian engraving. Below the river, in the lower world, I machine embroidered 2 figures onto my quilt using metallic thread. These are from a series of engraved shell drinking cups and represent Wedgemouth, a more than human figure on the left, and T-Bar, a human figure on the right. The godlike figure is handing the axis mundi, or the tree of life, into the keeping of the human figure. This sends a message that is relevant to us all today to realize that the care of the world is in our keeping. So this type of work, connecting with iconography and the ideas they represent, focuses on my identity as a Muscogee person and how I map myself in the Mississippian world. Muscogee scholar and geographer Laura Harjo writes that wherever Muscogee people live geographically, when we speak our language, practice our culture, make artwork inspired by our iconography, or look at the stars, we are in what she calls the time-space kin envelope and connected to all the Muscogee people, past, present, and future. Think of your own family, your personal history, and the forces that have shaped you. All of us as human beings exist within our own time-space kin envelope. These connections can go back a long, long way and can be transmitted through artwork and iconography. In 2020, during the early days of the pandemic, I made some textile COVID art masks. These are also inspired by traditional Mississippian designs. Hisakata, breath, is Hessian with a hand-embroidered Mississippi double spiral taken from pottery found in my homelands and freshwater pearls. Hisakates, we breathe, has 2 Mississippian figures hand-painted on mulberry bark and a border of shell beads. Lick Creek Serpent Gorget is hand-drawn with acrylic ink onto fabric. At around this time, I also began taking online Muscogee language classes on Zoom. I used what I was learning in my art. Este Muscogee Oas means I am Muscogee in our language. The background fabric was printed with the words part Indian, half-breed, savage, with the words Este Muscogee Oas hand-painted in red ink. This mask was in an online exhibition called Masked Heroes, which was organized by First Americans Art Magazine. And this is a photographic self-portrait, which won the Jesse Ross Cobb Photography Award in 2021 at the Trail of Tears Art Show in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. In this photograph, I'm wearing my mask of the same name. I am here in this photograph proclaiming that I am Muscogee in the language that my father Frank was forbidden to speak. I am breaking that barrier and reclaiming our native language. As part of my search for my Muscogee identity, I looked into my ancestry as far back as I could go. In 1832, a Creek census was carried out. The Parsons and Abbott Roll is a comprehensive pre-removal document that lists the entire Muscogee Nation. It contains the names of all of the heads of households arranged by Creek towns. In the 1832 census, I found 6 Upper Creek towns that listed the name of my great-great-great-grandfather, Pahos Harjo, or variations on his name. 6 towns held by River Spirit has a needle-felted river on a base of felt made from Dartmoor gray-faced sheep and is stitched with beads to represent those 6 towns. They are held within a circle in the center of the 4 directions. And in this textile work, another piece called Road to Oklahoma, I created a bird's eye view of the road which carries our bloodline. Clouds separate, giving a clear view of our journey. The road to Oklahoma holds many parts of our story. Our rivers and towns are needle felted on the left-hand side. The great hand holds the souls of our ancestors. A row of 4 Mississippian gorgets decorates the right-hand side. The pewter line which connects them represents our resilience. A red stick warrior turns and faces my father next to his car in Muscogee, Oklahoma, honoring him as a fellow warrior. A bundle of red sticks signifies readiness to go to war. I understand now that my father Frank was a warrior who had lost a society which would have given him a place of honor, a warrior adrift within a rage that he probably never understood. I'm taking the concept of mapping my identity further by beginning a series of works which explore color combinations. For many years, it was difficult for me to claim and assert my Native identity. This was due to my deep disconnection to my indigeneity and my own internalized stereotypes of who a Native person is. It's in My DNA is the first in this series. The applique green design is from a Mississippian shell carving in the shape of a DNA sequence. The sun circle places me in the center of the four directions. Fushua Poyafekcha, spirit bird, is a personal symbol of mine who represents a guide or witness and travels with me on my Muscogee journey. I've used a combination of free motion machine quilting and hand quilting. Edge Dancer has a bold interior shape that seems to dance in space. 3 cross and circle motifs guide the eye around the quilt while Spirit Bird looks on. The interior of the central shape is heavily textured with hand quilting. The OG shapes on the right signify portals between worlds. In the upper right-hand corner, Enkathako, the Great Hand, reminds me of my connection to all of the Muscogee people, past, present, and future. In my journey, I have often encountered difficult contemporary issues that stem from the experience and trauma of generations of people. One such issue is missing and murdered Indigenous women, or MMIW. Indigenous women and girls are disproportionately the victims of violence and sexual assault. The causes vary from racism to social factors and legal disparities in the application of justice. The red dress has come to symbolize this issue. I made this ribbon skirt in 2019 to wear for a talk I gave on missing and murdered Indigenous women in London. My Sacred Threads work began as an installation at my first solo art exhibition in Devon, England. I printed historical photographs of Native American women onto fabric, painted and stitched them with red, and finally connected them together using red silk thread to represent the bloodline which connects all women. In the center of the installation at my art exhibition, I posted information on the topic of missing and murdered Indigenous women. In 2019, I used many of the elements of this installation to make my Sacred Threads dress for the annual exhibition Bring Her Home, Stolen Daughters of Turtle Island in Minnesota. This piece reflects the cultural crossover between Native American communities by using imagery and iconic styles to create a synthesis from different Indigenous influences. Although the dress style is representative of a collective Plains identity, the bodice and sleeves contain imagery that is meaningful to both Plains people and to my Southeastern ancestors. The representation of the Path of Souls and the Great Hand on the right-hand sleeve are where our ancestors dwell. The pattern of stars across the bodice echoes the elk teeth pattern in many Plains dresses and extends into a freer Milky Way pattern across the sleeves. The 4 square beads at the neck and the bottom of the dress represent the Muscogee concept of harmony and balance. The red in the throat triangle is an aesthetic choice and a personal symbol of me finding my voice, both as an artist and as a Muscogee woman. It is through our bloodline that we discover, claim, and reaffirm our Native identity. The photographs at the bottom of the dress were chosen to represent all Native women. These women embody the strength and endurance of Indigenous women and the resilience of our ancestors. The piece also recognizes the darker side of shared Native American experience, missing and murdered Indigenous women. The figures on the belt drop are witness to over 500 years of violence and murder, the red hand painted over the mouth being used to reference this issue today, hidden but not silenced. The dress has now been acquired by the British Museum. When I dropped the dress off, it was the first time I had seen it on a mannequin. The conservators and I discussed how it will be presented when it goes on permanent display in autumn 2025. We decided that it will appear to float in space, evoking a presence through the marking of absence. The issue of land and sovereignty is an ongoing topic of discussion for Native American nations. The Land Back movement is seeking to restore Native land where it has been misappropriated or sovereignty has been undermined, and in many cases, legal challenges are succeeding. In the 2020 U.S. Supreme Court decision, Murdered versus Oklahoma, the sovereignty of the Muscogee Nation over lands that were in the original 1832 treaty that established the nation's reservation were upheld against objections from the state of Oklahoma. In this piece, the words "land back" are cross-stitched over a paper map of the Creek Nation. The Supreme Court's opinion on the decision, written by U.S. Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch, is printed on acetate and stitched onto the piece. As well as land, a nation's culture and sense of identity resides in its language. Where once children in boarding schools were punished for speaking their native language, now teachers are helping Native people to learn and revive their language. I was proud earlier this year to go to Tulsa, not only to take place in the Muscogee art market for the first time, but also to receive my certificate in the Muscogee language after 3 years of studying online with the College of the Muscogee Nation. At the ceremony, I also met my Mahaya, or teacher, Norma Marshall, in person for the first time. This was a difficult undertaking, not only because the Muscogee language is difficult to learn. During my studies, I was keenly aware that I had forbidden words and sounds in my mouth, words that my dad and grandmother would have been punished and shamed for speaking. I began my Muscogee journey in 2008 as one of self-discovery and never intended to show this work in public. 6 years later, I found that I had made a body of work, which I decided to show from my home in Devon Open Studios in 2014. It felt important for me to do this the first time from a safe place. At that point, I still carried a lot of shame about my Native heritage. I was so shocked when a visitor said to me, "You're so lucky to be Native American." It brought home to me that many people romanticize Native Americans or believe that we're part of the past. In 2018, I decided to exhibit the work in public in a solo exhibition. It had a very positive reception. This led me to sending work to art shows in Oklahoma for enrolled members of Native American nations. My work has met with praise and awards, which has allowed me to feel accepted as an Indigenous artist. My artwork has acted as my personal emissary to my community. It led me to reconnecting to my nation via artwork, closing the gap that my father had created between our family and the community he left behind. The Muscogee Nation has recently purchased my art quilt, The Road to Oklahoma, as part of a collection of artwork by Muscogee artists for public display in the Council Oak Comprehensive Healthcare Center in Tulsa, Oklahoma. This was so affirming to me, and I am so proud the artwork, which tells my personal story, as well as that of Muscogee history and culture, has been so honored by my nation. My Muscogee friend who lives in Tulsa regularly sends me selfies taken with my quilt. And many of the textile COVID art masks I made at the beginning of the pandemic have been exhibited in America and have found homes. In 2021, Muscogee OS was acquired by the New York Public Library for their permanent collection of 80 culturally relevant COVID masks. Others have gone to private collectors. In 2022, the Royal Albert Memorial Museum and Art Gallery in Exeter, England, acquired my self-portrait for permanent display in the Ancestral Voices section of their Americas collection. In April 2022, I was juried into the 4th annual Muscogee Art Market. This was a milestone for me to be with my artwork in the Muscogee Nation. My art quilt Palofa won first place in the non-wearable textile category. And Edge Dancer was acquired by the nation for their new Citizens Services building, which will open in spring 2026. The building will be filled with artwork made by Muscogee artists. Besides having my artwork recognized by my nation, it was so meaningful to talk about my work with Native visitors to my booth. They related to and resonated with so much of what my artwork speaks about, sharing their own stories and those of their parents and grandparents. Exhibiting my artwork in the US has enabled me to make connections with Indigenous people and artists that I'm geographically far removed from. And showing my artwork in the UK and Europe has allowed me to educate people about Native Americans and the true history of colonization in the Americas. My artwork and the stories they tell have also given people in my adopted country of England who have colonized ancestries, for example, Welsh, Scottish, Irish, and Roma people, a place to recognize the commonality in these stories and to find a way to begin to tell theirs. In addition to being an artist, I work as an art and mental health practitioner in which I hold safe space for people to explore who they are creatively. One of my workshops is Who I Am, exploring identity and cultural heritage through textiles. Using our hands as a starting point, workshop participants use a variety of textile techniques to assert their identity. I have held this workshop with refugees from the war in Ukraine, people from Portuguese colonies in Africa, and British people of Irish, Caribbean, and Welsh descent. Though we all have many different backgrounds, we recognize the common threads in our histories. In my adopted home in Devon, England, I'm deepening my connection with the land there, and which surprises some people with my Muscogee ancestors. When I moved to Dartmoor in 2007, I fell in love with its rivers and trees, a landscape that is reminiscent of my nation's original homelands in Georgia and Alabama. Also, where I live on Dartmoor, home to many deer, I have rediscovered the skills of brain tanning deer hide that would have been practiced by my Muscogee ancestors, using brains, water, smoke, and sheer muscle to turn deer skins into hides that can be worn and used. Over the 4-day-long process, I felt my Muscogee foremothers inhabit my body, and I connected to them in a very deep and profound way. I've made a pair of Southeastern pucker toe moccasins and jewelry from some of the buckskin. I have a total of 6 buckskins that I'm saving for a special piece of artwork. So today I've shown you where I am on my journey and how that journey has been chronicled in my art. Where do I go next? My Muscogee and European ancestry means that I am at the confluence of many streams. With the additional influence of living and working in the UK, this provides me with my own unique perspective on who I am, where I come from, and where I might go next. For example, learning to brain tan deer skins made me look into the traditional Muscogee relationship to deer and to want to discover more about the impact and influence of the deerskin trade with Great Britain back in the 18th and early 19th centuries. Trade cloth blankets were made in Witney, Oxfordshire, to trade with Southeastern Indigenous nations. This led to an upheaval in the traditional subsistence and conservatory relationship that we had with the deer, to be replaced by slaughter for commodity trading. The depth of this trade led to surveys which identified our homelands as prime cotton growing land. This in turn led to the removal of our people and their replacement by settlers, including plantation owners whose wealth depended on slavery. And that had a major impact via the Civil War and its continuing racial aftermath on the US today. I've recently been awarded a British Library Eccles Fellowship to study their archives on this subject. Whatever I find, whatever I feel, I know I will interpret and represent those feelings through my art. So this brings us to the end of the slideshow. Mado, thank you for watching and listening. I'll stop sharing, and I just have a few closing words. So art making has given me a way to process and speak about emotions and events it would be impossible to do using words alone. I don't hold back from difficult subjects and always attempt to explore my own identity with honesty. I think it's this honesty that resonates with people who appreciate my work and see some of their own stories and feelings reflected there. So my art represents important parts of how I have found my identity and how I map my place in the world. I could not have done this without delving deep into the past that shaped my father, my family, and my ancestors. This journey continues because this journey never ends. And before I take any questions you may have about my work, I'll leave you with a quote from Pulitzer Prize-winning Chickasaw author Linda Hogan. I think it applies to all of us wherever we come from. Suddenly, all of my ancestors are behind me. Be still, they say. Watch and listen. You are the result of the love of thousands.
Melinda, thank you so much. This is just a fantastic, I mean, first of all, it was so richly illustrated and just such a beautiful telling of your family's history. So thank you so much for sharing that with us today. And while we wait for the audience to put some questions in that Q&A box, I know there was another quilt that you wanted to talk about briefly. So I'm going to share the photo of that quilt here now. Could you tell us a little bit about this one?
Yeah, so this is a quilt called Breathe. In 2020, I was given a grant by Arts Council England to make a quilt, just something based on my experience of the pandemic. And I had been shaken to the core by the murder of George Floyd and all of the Black Lives Matter protests that erupted since then. So this was the piece that I made. It's double-sided, and I've given you, Lucy, a link to put in the chat to the film that I've made about the quilt Breathe. It's currently showing at a gallery in Bristol, England called Rainmaker Gallery. It'll be there through the 5th of July. And it's going to be at a Sacred Threads Quilt Show in Indianapolis this autumn. So I'm just really proud and gratified that it's being shown, especially at this time when history is trying to be rewritten and people's voices are trying to be silenced.
Yeah, thank you. And that video link is in the chat, as well as the link to the current exhibition in the UK. And for those of you who are in Indianapolis or in the United States, definitely check it out in the Sacred Thread Show. See, we do have a couple of questions here. So this one says from Tanya, have you connected with any of the descendants of the Upper and Lower Creeks still at reserved lands in Alabama?
Not people still at the reserve lands in Alabama. The cousins I recently met in Oklahoma, I connected online about a year ago, and we have the same great grandfather who is a man named Tecumseh Phillips. He had a first wife that my line came from, and she passed and he married again, and her line. But I don't have any family or blood connections with people still in back there in our homelands.
This question says, what impact does living at a distance from your homeland make on your artwork?
That's a very good question, and um, I'm gonna. It's two ways because I've been making artwork to put the threads together, put the pieces together, figure everything out, and I think because I am at a distance, I can kind of come in from a different perspective, which I think is very interesting. A lot of Muskogee people, well, there are 100,000 of us, and I think 60,000 live on the reservation or in Oklahoma, and 40,000 of us live beyond. I think those are that's the right way around. But people who were born and raised in Oklahoma, they've got a real connection to the culture there, although a lot of them grew up not speaking the language and not actually learning a lot about their history and culture. It's a fairly recent thing. And the Muscogee Nation has fairly recently, I'm going to say within the past 10 years or so, started taking people back to the homelands, to Ocmulgee Park in, it's near Macon, Georgia. And that's a really wonderful thing, to take Muskogee people born and raised in Oklahoma back to the homelands. But for me personally, I think it gives me a different point of view and a different bird's eye view. And I'm just able to see things that I might not see if I was living there, immersed in the culture. And yeah, that's kind of what my artwork is all about, to explore and talk about that and all of that. And living in England, the research I'm going to do at the Eccles Institute of the British Library, I might not have that lens on if I wasn't living in England, if I hadn't started doing brain tan buckskin here in Devon.
And Dorothy is asking something that I was wondering as well. Why fiber art? She says, why have you chosen fiber to express your very eloquent voice?
Oh, that's another very good question. I actually, luckily, stumbled into a quilt shop before I moved. I moved to the UK 28 years ago, and about 3 or 4 years before I moved, I walked into a quilt shop that was near my house in Southern California, and I walked out having signed up for a sampler patchwork class and bought a floor model Bernina sewing machine, which I still use today. And it's fabric. I just love fabric, the sensuality of it and the colors. And if you sew it together and it's not right, you can add more on or take it off. So it just hit the spot. I'd explored a little bit pastels and acrylics, but when I found textiles, I was like, wow, this is it.
And I was thinking while you were talking that because the textile processes can be sort of slow, maybe that helps with the fact that you're processing your emotions and your history, through the work. So that gives you maybe some time to sit with what you're working on.
Yeah, that's very true too.
Another question from Tanya. She says, would you consider the war club symbols of our ancestral British Creeks that struggled in the American Revolution or Seminole Wars? Sorry, Seminole Wars. I would love to see that image in your work.
The war clubs, yes. That's very interesting. I am in touch with some Southeastern artists who make war clubs, and they're like, well, the women really don't have the war clubs, but I would like to commission someone to make me one. And in fact, another artwork and another story that I've been working on for about 10 or so years is about it's about a Muskogee girl named Little Red Stick, and the Red Stick is the Red Stick Warriors. It's the war club, and her grandfather was a Red Stick fighter. And in this story that I'm learning about, this figure that's been coming to me, and she is rounded up with all of the other Creeks for removal to Indian Territory, but she steals out of the stockade with her grandfather's war club, and she's friends with wolves. So it's a little bit of a play on Little Red Riding Hood, but it's Little Red Stick and the wolves are allies. But yeah, the war club is a very powerful symbol. And the more that I start working with this Little Red Stick character who's been coming to me, I've done some drawings of her, but watch this space because she's going to be moving into my fiber art. But the war club will definitely be there, the Red Stick.
Wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your process. Are you starting with the research and then sketching, or how does a piece sort of evolve?
Okay, so sometimes it's so I read things and I see things and I take it inside of me, and some sits there and some is like this has to come out. And I don't often do a lot of prep work or a lot of prep sketching. When I do some of my big pictorial art quilts, I'll make a cartoon, which is I'll get a piece of paper the size the quilt's going to be, and I'll rough out some of the shapes, and I'll put that on my design wall and work on that. But other things, it's like an idea that I have, and I do a lot of research because I really want to be accurate, and I want to know that what I'm talking about is accurate and all of that. So some of my pieces are very, very researched, but I think it's the making of the piece that lets it be what it's going to be. I think if I start out with too rigid of a sketch or too rigid of an idea, that just gets really tight and I feel kind of boxed in. So I'm just learning to let it evolve. And one of the most important things that I've learned is if I'm stuck with a piece of artwork, I'll have a dialogue with it and I'll say, who are you? What do you want to be? Tell me how to bring you out into the world. And that it sounds a bit, maybe it sounds a bit weird, but that helps it be what it is meant to be. I feel like the artwork kind of comes through me, and it's my hands and textile art that brings it into being. But it's not generated from me; it comes through me. And having that dialogue with the idea is really a helpful part of the process sometimes.
And I think this is a good question to end on from Stacy. Stacy says, I'm planning to artistically express my family history as well. What advice could you give to help me begin this journey to express individual lives? How do you synthesize the information to such a concise expression?
That's another very, very good question. I don't have a lot of photographs of my, I don't have a photograph of my grandmother. I hope someday I'll find a photo of her. But if you do have photographs, and you're a textile artist, you can print them onto fabric or even paper, and you can do machine and hand work with them to create the work. I think again, just a having a chat with them, have a dialogue with them, and ask, what's your story? How can I bring your story out? And one of the most amazing things that I've learned throughout this whole journey, I started out knowing nothing. I remember when I first went to the public library, I looked up Creek, and I found Cree, and I was like, they're in Canada, what? And I started from knowing nothing. And there is so much information out there, but with all of the disconnection and cutting off that happens, we still have this core of knowing, and it blows me away. And you can really trust that. It's like, I think I said in my talk that we can have a lot of trauma that comes with us through the generations when we have the history that some of us carry, but there's also very great resilience, and you have to go through the hard stuff to get to the good stuff. And I don't think you can have one without the other. So with your work that you want to do with your family, your ancestors and your family, I think that's really amazing. And start with images. If you don't have pictures of people, maybe just think and feel into them, and you might come up with some images or some colors. But it's very exciting that you're going to be doing it.
Thank you for that. I think that's a great note for us to end on. And for our audience, you can see Melinda's work until July 5th at that show in Devon in the UK. And coming soon to Sacred Threads in the US and to the British Museum to their permanent collection. And then also at the New York Public Library and what was that? The Royal Albert Memorial Museum in Exeter.
Yeah.
So lots of chances to see Melinda's work. And you can also see it online on her website, which that link is in the chat as well. So thank you so much, Melinda. It's been such a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you. And I'm going to end with the Muscogee word, two Muscogee words. Mado is thank you, and Chihi Chathlis is I'll be seeing you.
Wonderful. And thank you to our audience for watching. We're so glad to have you here with us every Wednesday. And next week, join us at the same time in the same place for a presentation by the Surface Design Association. Will be How to Storing, Shipping, and Exhibiting Fiber Art. As always, you can find all the details and our archive of over 250 recordings at sakwa.com/textile talks. If you enjoy Textile Talks, we would love it if you would tell a friend, post about us on social media, or consider supporting our work financially with a donation at sakwa.com/TT support. And don't forget, viewers of Textile Talks get $20 off the first year of a new Sakwa membership with code TALKS. That's TALKS. So thank you all so much for being here. I hope you have a fantastic Wednesday. Thanks for watching.